Hey guys, Block here, and today I'm going to show you how I turn GE's Gamma plush into this. Now, I have a lot of issues with the existing plush, which I really rip into in this video, so that's why I improved him. So here we've got Gamma with his arms and legs torn off, and all I did was I took a seam ripper and ripped the threads all there, so that now we're left with him just as a base right here. And what I want to do is I want to change all of these, his arms, leg, and everything. So first with his legs is there's a seam right under the yellow here that you can see right there. And I'm just going to rip that off. And instead of making his legs 2 segments like this, I'm going to make them 3 segments by using some gray felt to extend this. So here you can see I ripped off the top of the shoe, and for this one I just went ahead and ripped the wheel off. I would recommend using a hair dryer to heat it off so that the glue comes off easier. Don't want to risk damaging anything, but my wheels were already loose, so I did that. And then I decided to take out this hard plastic piece that was in the bottom there, just because, I don't know, it wasn't really doing much. This one still has it in there. You can see it doesn't really help with the form at all. It just kind of creates awkward creases, and I feel like it adds an unnecessary level of hardness there that doesn't really do anything for what it's trying. And then I went ahead and ripped the gun off of his arm as well, and I ripped the front of the barrel out. And this is something interesting, is all of the black parts on this plush you can see here are a printed fabric. It's fabric that's printed black. It's not just already black. And that's why the black on the shoes or his feet looks so strange, because it's not really a black fabric. And it's just very confusing because there's so many solid black parts that aren't printed to anything that are printed on. It's just a really confusing decision on their end, but what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to add a layer of gray on the inside of this and move that black to the back of the gun so that it gives some depth to the barrel. Is here you can kind of see how that's sewn in. Is I flipped it on the other side to stitch in the black part of the gun, and now flipping it the right way, you'll see it's like that, almost like the barrel of the gun has extended. But now what I'm going to do is push that inside there, and I'm not even going to worry about sewing this hole up. So now with the barrel of the gun pushed in, you can see it looks like that and has a lot more depth to it. And then there's these side details that I'm going to cover with some darker gray felt just because I think the black looks very cheap. But I'm going to save that for later, and in the meantime, work on the arms and legs. So next up here, I have Gamma's legs, and they're at a slight angle here. They're not sewn yet, but what I did was where the leg is sewn together under this gray part, and with this part at the ankle there, I actually just used the seam ripper to rip that. And it's sewn into the red there, but it won't damage anything. And so what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna sew the bottom of this gray piece on top of the ankle there so that it gives it an angle, because GE's was severely missing that, because it's supposed to be like this so that the wheel can be angled and hitting the ground, but GE's is just straight up. So I'm in my bathroom and you can see I'm peeling what is essentially his belt on this plush off. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's not supposed to be this flat. So I literally just used a hair dryer to start it, and now it's kind of just ripping off pretty easy. That goes to show how cheap this is. I'm doing this one-handed, by the way. So here you can see Gamma's belt is removed. He's got like this flap here, and then his little mirror thing. I have no clue what either of these are. But if you look at the original plush released for Sonic Adventure, you'll notice this is made of 2 pieces, and this is made of multiple pieces as well. But GE cheaped out. They didn't want to give us a good Gamma plush, so we got these instead. And this is supposed to mimic depth. I thought this was a design at first, but no, this is to mimic the depth of the thing, which is so stupid. And this just, frankly, I don't understand what this is trying to do at all. It's just horribly cheap. Along with the scope on his head, they misinterpreted the artwork. This is nothing what it's supposed to look like. So I'm gonna cut all 3 of those parts off. All 3 of those parts are just gonna be cut off. So as you can see, I cut those 2 things off, and then for his little scope, What I actually did was I ripped it out with the seam ripper and I just ladder stitched that up because I figured it'd be best to leave that clean because I can't guarantee that that part specifically will be covered up when I sew in the new scope. But now this is Gamma's body. So setting his body aside, we're actually going to come back to his legs, and what's interesting is not this bottom half of his legs, but the top half of the plush, and some of his body, weirdly enough, have this inside of it, which actually mimics like the full length of his legs pretty well, I'd say, when you put it here. And so what I'm going to do is, just using this in my gray felt, is I'm basically just going to sew over that to get what I want for the legs. Maybe I'll make it a little longer too to kind of accommodate for sewing it into his body and for adding some ball joints that I want to add on, which I don't think are going to be real ball joints, but I'm just going to do some stitches around the leg to kind of tighten it and give the illusion of a ball joint there. So now what I've got here is two of these cylinders. Basically, I just sewed them up and flipped them inside out, and the little bit of gray that's inside the legs here, that's what I'm going to sew these to. But I'm first going to stuff this really full and then stuff the bottom of this full as well and ladder stitch it in there, just because that's going to be way easier than sewing it any other way. But I'm going to make sure to remove the stuffing afterwards because I actually want to stuff wires into these limbs. I think I'm going to use these for the arms as well, just because it gives them a great bit more length than their original size, as where my pinky is there, that might as well be the original size of the arms. On top of that as well, I might just remake the gun completely, so this was kind of pointless, but it's just because I look at it and I realize GE really messed up. First off, this looks really cheap. This side is just white and then the sides are ugly. This black printing detail isn't nice, but on top of it, this one on the top is just made up. It should be centered and in the back, not off center and towards the front. It's really weird. It's supposed to have a bit of a curved shape where this bolt is. It's supposed to come down and it's supposed to extend onto his arm some. It's just a lot of missed detail and it lacks a lot. So frankly, I'm just gonna remake this thing because I am very unhappy with this. So for Gamma's legs here, you can see they are a lot longer now. Their original length is pathetic compared to this. Let me grab his original leg. It probably went about that tall. So we've added about a whole new leg to it, and that's crazy to think. And now I've stuffed this actually. I didn't remove the stuffing, but that's because I want to recreate this part as close as I can so that I can put it on the top of his leg there. And now a lot of artwork depicts that top one in different ways, and then I'll show you what that looks like and how it's done. Okay, so the more I look at it, the more I am just confused and baffled at how many surprising inconsistencies Gamma has. So it's really confusing how many contradictions Gamma seems to have. It is a whole mess of details for Gamma here. So I'm just gonna follow the Sonic Adventure render the closest I can, because it seems that's somewhat what GE is taking influence by. So I've got Gamma's thighs and biceps cut out here, and the difference between them is just the color of the cuff there. Is on the thighs it's gold, but on the bicep it's gray. And so how I'm gonna sew these is just taking one of each of these and I'm gonna fold them both over themselves. Once they're folded like that, I'm just gonna sew them together along this edge here. So that's what the cuff should look like when sewn, and I went ahead and just slid it onto the leg so you can see what it looks like when it's on. And then now I've taken some wire and wrapped it around itself to help stabilize it, and then I'm gonna slide it into the legs and into the lower body here. So I've put Gamma's leg on here, as you can see, and to get the wire in, I actually removed the stuffing from the leg and just kind of brute forced it in the foot. I kind of wiggled some stuffing out of the toe to lock the wire in there. And then you'll see here as well is I wrapped a lot more wire around it just so it'd be a lot more firm and sturdy. And now taking the gray part, I'm just gonna ladder stitch that into his body there. So now you can see Gamma's leg is fully sewn on, and it is a huge height improvement. And then you'll notice this wire is all wrapped up. It's because I didn't have thick enough wire, so I just wrapped a ton around itself, again, for sturdiness. And now I'm gonna do the same thing with this leg. Remove the stuffing, cram the wire in there, kind of angling it like this so that it goes into the foot. And then just sew the gray on top. Now, Gamma has both of his legs on him, and he is so much taller. But now, keeping Gamma here, I need to cut out the arm pieces, which I think I'm just gonna cut out what I did for the legs. And I might even remake his gun as well, just because, again, I'm not very happy with how they did this. So you'll see here now that Gamma has his arm, and it's just the same thing I did with the legs. Sewing the arm into his hand, and then onto the body and stuffing it with a wire inside, which you can see the wire here, and I actually found some better wire than before, so I'm using this, and I even think I might replace the wire in the legs with this. And really what would be good is if from here the legs just continued up here and connected to the bar of the arms in there, because then I would be able to bend the legs at the hip a lot easier. So now I have the back and the front of the gun sewn on really easy with their straight edges on the bottom facing this rounded part. And I went ahead and took this dangly bit and just sewed it in like this on the front part of the gun. And now, with the gun facing the other way, inside out, all along this edge with the curve going into the front and back, I'm gonna take this long piece and just sew it all into that hole there. With the bottom of the gun sewn in, I just flipped it inside out and stuffed it, and you can see that looks a lot cooler. And so now, I'm gonna stuff his arm and sew these together at this hole on the back. So Gamma's gun here is now sewn onto his arm, and I just sewed that onto the body as well, so you can see that looks a lot nicer. And now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create the barrel of his gun, and on top of that, just add two little like half circles on each side of his arm here, made of the same shiny black, just to make sure that it kind of blends better going into his arm, because that's another detail that GE missed. Who would have thought? So here we have all the pieces on the table, and right here's the barrel of the gun, which I just kind of mocked this one, but I just made it one long piece that I sewed the edge of and flipped it inside out halfway, so that now it kind of looks like this, and the inside is also completely clean, no visible stitches. So it's just like that, and these here are just two little domes sewn together, and those are gonna go on the sides of the gun. I'll show you how I'm gonna sew those on. So as you can see here, the base of Gamma's gun is done, and the little black parts I cut out here just go on each side of the gun, and then the barrel of the gun I just stitched on from the outside with a ladder stitch. It is 3-dimensional, so it is hollow in there. And that is his finished gun. And I would say it is a huge improvement over this sorry excuse for a weapon. And now with the gun set aside for now, I'm gonna sew the cuffs of his arms up there. And what I'm gonna have to do is put them on this way and stitch them with the ugly side showing and the gray pointing towards his shoulder. Because I didn't do it like the legs, I'm putting it on after the fact instead of before the arms are sewn onto the body. And you can kind of see what I did here, and I sewed it really tight just to make sure that when I flip it inside out, it looks good and it's not floating or loose or anything. So I'm gonna repeat it with this one, and then flip it the other way around so that the red's on top. So you can see here what the finished arms look like now, and all around the top of the gray is covered, and it's just the red. There's a few details I still need to add on those parts, but I'm not gonna focus on that, and instead I'm gonna get to his weird crotch guard thing, which is just two of these pieces that I'm gonna sew over each other, leaving the top edge open just so I can flip it inside out and the stitches aren't visible. And again, on GE, it's just a single flap of fabric like that. And now it's a sturdy fabric, but still it's a single flap with really crappy details instead of just being 3D. So now with this piece sewn, you can see I flipped it inside out because the stitches aren't visible. And then I'm gonna sew it or glue it right over top where I cut off the previous one. And the reason I might glue it is because there's still glue left over on them. and that's not exactly easy to stitch through without damaging a needle. So I might try sewing it on, but I might end up gluing it on as well. Doesn't really matter though, as it should be covered up by one of the tanks on them. So I decided to sew the flap on, and it was a little easier than I thought, but still had to work around some of the glue or just brute force it. But there you can see it is three-dimensional, and I think looks a lot better than that flat flap. And so now with that, I'm gonna get to work on the tanks he has all around his body, and those should be pretty easy. So instead of a belt like it is on the GE plush, I'm actually gonna make up these three segments of cylinders, and right here you can see I have one sewn, but for these other ones, what you're gonna do is just fold them over themselves like that and sew a circle on each side. Here you can see the circles, and you repeat the same thing for the black part and the other gray one. You can see here how it's sewn with the circles, and then on the bottom, I just sew each side a little bit and leave a hole open so I can flip it inside out and stuff it. So now with these cylinders sewn, what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna sew them all on Gamma, with the black one covering the seam of the flap and his body here, and then these gray ones going on the side, making sure that they extend back behind him. So right here you can get a look at that and see Gamma has the front tank and the two side canisters on him as well. And now they're pretty tight under his arms, but it's not too tough to get these on. It's just a ladder stitch on the top and bottom. Same here, and these go off the body fairly far. And next, I'm gonna sew the little connection piece between the canister and the black tank part there. And so that's just gonna be a gray rectangle folded in half and sewn along the long edge. Flip it inside out, stuff it, and I put a wire in there to make sure it keeps its form. And I'm just gonna sew it into each one like that. Take a look at that. Is that not so much better than his stupid belt? But now with that done, I think next I'm gonna do his module. But I do just wanna highlight one thing here, is the original module was sewn in right there. And I sewed this over top, not really thinking that the glue and everything would still be visible. You just have to live with the glue. There's no way of getting around the glue unless you really just constantly glue it with a hairdryer, and then preferably protecting your hands, carefully picked the glue off and made sure it looked nice. But there's really no fixing it. But then for that little bit in there where the original module was, is I just cut that off like I did with the flap here, and luckily the flap is now fully covered because of this and the tank here. The issue with that is it's not directly covered, so at an under angle or above you can see it. And so I might suggest using a seam ripper to rip that out and then sew that hole back up. Or you can do what I did and just color it with a black Sharpie, but be very cautious because you don't want to get it on the red, or that'll be a really bad look. So for the module thing on his chest, all it is just these three pieces, and you're just gonna take the hexagons and sew them all along the long straight edge on each side, and then I'll show you what to do after that. Now I've sewn up the module with the front and the back attached to that long piece, and at the bottom here is a little hole where the long piece ends, and I'm just gonna flip that inside out. You can see that it is inside out there. And so this excess, I'm just gonna cut off or stuff inside, and then I'm gonna stuff this and sew up that hole. So here is the sewn up module for his chest. You can see it's just a simple little piece here, and then I'm not actually gonna do a connection piece. I'm just gonna sew this directly onto his body and directly into the wire right here. So here I have that little bit sewn on, and it's just one stitch right there, and then another stitch just connected to the wire on his base. And also off camera, I actually ripped off one of the legs so that I could feed the new wiring here. And man, it gives his legs a much better bend if I wasn't dropping this guy and if his gun wasn't in the way. But you can see there, it's a much sturdier bend that's a lot stronger and a lot better. So next up here is Gamma's scope, which actually has three components, but just focusing on the scope here is these four pieces, which are just two parts of the base and then two parts for the inside of the scope and the end of it. So at first I was gonna sew these together like that, but I've decided that I'm actually gonna take this yellow piece and fold it this way where the short edges of it meet, and I'm just gonna sew along that edge there. And now with this little piece sewn, I just flipped it halfway inside out so you can see it's folded over itself. And now the side with the visible edge, I'm gonna sew that into the blue circle. So now with this circle sewn on this end, you can see it creates some depth in there, and you can see the blue from the inside. And next what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take this gray piece and wrap it around like that, and then sew it into the yellow and blue pieces there, so that then when I flip it out, it's gonna form the scope. So you can see that's what it looks like, and when you flip it this way, it's shaping up to be the scope. But I'm actually gonna leave it facing this way for now, and then sew this gray circle on the back, then I can flip it inside out. So now I've got that gray circle sewn on the back, and really easily just threw this hole on the bottom, and now you can see it looks like that. I'm just gonna take some stuffing here and stuff it. And now with it stuffed, I'm just gonna sew up this seam here. So now the scope is done, and you can see it's just a small little cylinder like that. And I'm not just gonna slap it on the side of his head, because that's wrong. GE messed up. They literally misinterpreted the artwork. What's really supposed to be there is kind of like a block in his head, and then a wire that sticks out and brings the scope floating about right here. So I'm gonna get to making those two things now. So right here, I just cut out some pretty simple pieces, and these are gonna be the front and back of the little dock that's on his head. And then this rectangle is just gonna be sewn all along the edge, except for this long edge here, making sure to get these on each side. So the thing that goes on his head is now finished, and there's some excess up here, but I'm just gonna fold that in half. Then I'm just gonna ladder stitch it onto his head while stuffing it. So now Gamma has that little lump on his head, and next I'm just gonna take this rectangle here and just fold it over itself long ways and stitch the long edge. It's gonna be similar to the wire I did here connecting the canisters, but instead it's gonna connect the scope and the little lump here. I went ahead and just connected the wire to the body and to the scope, and there you can see it is fully three-dimensional, unlike GE's original flat piece. And I have to say that is a huge improvement. You can even see the little bit of blue in there. But now with that done, I think that is almost every detail, but now I need to get to the smaller parts of it. So the first small detail I just went ahead and added off camera was these black stripes on his arms and legs on the parts I added. And how I did that basically was I just made a template using what's already on the plush, and then I just pinned this down and painted in the holes, so then you get the design made. And for the legs, I did it on the inside and the outside, and these aren't sewn, so I could move them around whoever I needed. Same with the arms, and I didn't do it on the inside there just because it would hit the canister, and I don't want paint to spread to that. And next what I'm gonna do is push these arms all the way up to where you can't see the gray between the shoulder and the bicep there, and I'm just gonna sew that in. And similar thing here, but I'm actually gonna leave the gray showing because there is some room between his thigh and his body. Now all that's sewn, and for the legs, I just did a small stitch right in the back there between the red and the gray. And with the arms, it's a lot more noticeable that it's just a clean stitch all the way around. And definitely, I would suggest if you're gonna try something like this, do it before you add the canister, because the canister made it a lot tougher to work with this. So do this beforehand if you're gonna try to modify your plush. But next up, I think I'm gonna add all the details on the gun, like all the bolts and the rectangles that kind of stick out of it. Okay, so I actually ended up taking some of these gems and just stuck them all on his cuffs all around him, even on the gray parts, because there are bolts on him in the render, so I chose to add those there as well, not just the gold, which, yet again, who would have thought? GE didn't add that on the gray parts, on the arm or the legs. But I decided to do that instead, and now I'm gonna get on to cutting out the pieces for the gun. So here you can see the gun has some felt details glued on now. And what I've done is I just cut out a circle for the big bolt here, 2 small rectangles that are glued on there, and then 1 big one right up here. And next what I'm gonna do is cut out 5 small circles to be smaller bolts across the gun, 3 that are lined up here right on the edge, and then 1 here and 1 right there. And I'm also gonna cut out half circles to go on top of this to make this look more like a screw. Now you can see there all of the added details on Gamma's gun, the big screw and the bolts on the front and on the top. And with the gun detailed on each side, Gamma is finished. Now here is the new and improved GE Gamma plush. There were a lot more fixes needed than I thought there would be, but I'm really happy with how he turned out. The 3D canisters on his waist helped to make him feel less flat than the original, along with the new module and flap underneath those. The bigger and better gun with more detail makes it feel a lot more robotic and cool, and so does the completed scope on his head. I still can't believe that was just a flat piece of fabric. All of those details, along with his longer limbs, help to make this plush feel a lot more on model. And that is how I improved the GE Gamma plush. Thank you all for watching, and leave a comment down below to let me know if you plan on doing this custom. That's all for now. See you next time.